Right, welcome back. Thank you all for joining us for our distinguished guest for our lunch speaker today for the elementary division. And so I am Theresa Gibson, and it's lovely to be here with you all and to get to host this session for Marbles Museum. And they are going to talk to us a little bit about the secret ingredients of science. So I will get us started by letting you know who this wonderful team is, and then I'm going to pass the microphone over to them for their talk. Today we have Hardened Englehart, who's the Vice President of Learning at Marbles Kids Museum. Her team develops and delivers engaging museum experiences and collaborates with community partners to create high-impact learning opportunities. She loves seeing children and families connect through play and the joy and delights kids experience through the wonder and wow of marbles. Harden has worked in the field of education for 28 years. What she loves about science is how we constantly make new discoveries and learn new information. There's always more to be curious about. Joining Harden, we have Chanette Swann, who has been sparking imagination, discovery, and learning at Marbles since 2015. She is passionate about the museum's mission and the stories that are created there in ensuring access for all. Chanette brings her talents as a professional singer-songwriter to her creative work at Marbles. She's the recent recipient of the Association of Children's Museums Diversity Fellowship, and she loves exploring the science of sound. And finally, our third guest speaker is Evan Cooper, and he is the learning experience developer at Marbles, creating and delivering one-of-a-kind, hands-on, play-based learning opportunities. Evan has a background in zoology, wildlife research, and STEM education. He enjoys pushing limits and taking risks. Evan loves that science is for everyone, and it affects your life even if you don't notice it. And so with that, I am really excited to pass the microphone over to our team at Marbles.
Hey there, everyone. I'm Harden. We are so excited to be here today, Chanette, Evan, and I want to start by congratulating all of you on the hard work and ingenuity it took for you to get to the North Carolina State Science and Engineering Fair. That is quite an accomplishment. You should be proud of yourselves. We are coming to you today here from Marbles Kids Museum in downtown Raleigh. I bet that many of you who have come here to play with us before. Raise your hand if you have. If you haven't come, we'd love for you to come play with us here at Marbles. And if you have, we'd love for you to come play with us again. We are currently open Wednesday through Sunday from 10 to 5. So we'd love to see you here. Marbles' mission is to spark imagination, discovery, and learning through play. We bring that mission to life through an amazing array of hands-on play-based exhibits, many of which are science and engineering related. Programs like our summer camps, documentary movies in our IMAX theater, and digital experiences too that you can access on social media or on our YouTube channel. So check us out. There's always a lot of science and engineering going on here at Marbles. Kids build larger than life structures out of giant Legos. They conduct experiments in our science sub. They investigate plants in our Sunsprouts Kids Garden. They use tools to measure and test in our IdeaWorks exhibit. And they use what we call the secret ingredients of science. And I'm going to give you a second right now to try and guess what those secret ingredients of science are. When it comes to STEM and innovation, it's more than what you know about science. It's about curiosity, creativity, your willingness to take risks and persist through failure, the secret ingredients of science that are what breakthrough discoveries come from. So I'm going to talk to you about curiosity. Let's think for a minute about what scientists and engineers do. Scientists and engineers solve problems, expand our knowledge and understanding, and create new possibilities. It's kind of what you did with your projects that brought you here today. How? Through curiosity. As humans, we are innately driven to learn and to find out. So we encourage you to be curious and cultivate your own curiosity, and not just about science. Here are some pointers. Be broadly curious. Research shows us that most of the world's most innovative problem solvers and scientists pursued knowledge across many disciplines, and they collaborated with experts from many different fields. Often solutions to problems come from out-of-the-box thinking or from inspiration from outside of the field. So be broadly curious about many things. Embrace what you don't know. Some people think that being smart means knowing and being good at everything effortlessly. But being smart actually means being a continuous learner and challenging yourself to try new things. Approach new information, new people, and new opportunities with curiosity. Instead of assuming, oh, that's not for me, or I'm not a science person, wonder, what will I find out? In my first month working here at Marbles, one day I arrived at my desk to find this giant box. And my boss said to me, hey, we want you to be in charge of Nano Days. It's an event about nanoscience. I had no idea what nanoscience was. I knew nothing about it. But instead of thinking, well, I can't possibly run an event about something I know nothing about, I got curious. And I discovered that nanoscience and technology is actually fascinating. A nanometer is a billionth of a meter. And at that scale, so small, properties change and they act differently. Gravity, surface tension, static electricity are not the same as they are at a larger scale. And so much innovation is possible through nanoscience and nanotechnology. Think self-cleaning toilets, fabrics that repel water, graffiti-proof paint, and maybe someday a space elevator. Let your curiosity get the best of you. I bet that you've had the experience of researching something that leads you to research something else, that leads you to research something else. And that is awesome. Go down those rabbit holes. You never know what you'll find out. Once when I was researching what lemurs eat for a program here at Marbles, I ended up researching how many calories there are in a cockroach. Can any of you guys guess how many calories there are in a cockroach? About 6 calories. Who knew? Go off the beaten path. Laying aside our usual patterns and habits allows us to unleash fresh perspectives, new ways of thinking, and make discoveries. One of my new pandemic pastimes has been driving back roads. So instead of driving the same way to and from work or to the places I usually go, I take a different route that I've never been down before. And I've made some fabulous finds that I would have missed out on if I always took the same route. Like a house with a giant, colorful mermaid statue all over the yard. Check out a random book from the library. Watch a TED Talk on something you know nothing about. Listen to a podcast on a new to you topic. What you learn might just spark your next great idea. So stay curious, and adults, you stay curious too. And now we're going to talk about the next secret ingredient in science. Chanette's going to tell you about creativity.
As a child, I was always told I was super creative. And it was said so much that I didn't even know what it meant because I was really young. And I finally decided I'm going to come up with my own definition of what creative means since I keep hearing it so much. So I thought to myself as a kid, creative people create stuff. And if you create stuff, that means you're an inventor. And I thought to myself, well, that means I'm not creative because I'm definitely not an inventor. I didn't make the light bulb and I didn't come up with the stoplight, and I could never, ever come up with over 100 uses for peanuts. Those scientists, those folks, those are the people that I thought was creative. And so my dad finally set me down and he says to me, you know, we call you creative because you make up poetry and you make up songs and you do storytelling and you sing and you dance and you do all of this stuff from one source, your imagination. And Chanette, my dad would say, that's why we say you're creative. So eventually, as I got older, I finally realized it. You know, we are all creative. We just need to activate it. And creativity is the ability to think and dream big with wild imagination into the possibility of what if. You know, Leonardo Da Vinci was one of the most creative people to ever live. He totally blurred the lines between art and science. This guy was making cannons, armored vehicles, waterways, bridges, even flying machines, all while being one of the most notable and one of the most talked about painters. And I wonder, could he have been so successful as a scientific engineer if he wasn't doing all those really cool paintings? Could Leonardo da Vinci had been one of the most wonderful painters if he wasn't doing all those cool engineering designs? I don't know. I just kind of believe that art and science and creativity and science, they kind of work together. They work as one unit. And that is coming from the source of creativity. Today, I am a professional singer and songwriter. And if it wasn't for my love for the arts and my love for being creative, I wouldn't have been able to approach science with so much boldness. For example, I remember being a kid and I would come up with these little songs to help me pass my tests, like evaporation, condensation, precipitation. No one else was doing that in my class, but that was the only way I was going to get through learning that water cycle. And also, I remember storytelling to myself just so I could understand the atmospheres and the layers in the earth. So I would pretend that I was this time traveler going from the troposphere into the stratosphere into the exosphere, all to pass a test and to have a better understanding of science. You see, it's okay to put your own twist on learning. It's okay to use and dig into your creativity to approach things that seem a little great and big, like science. People like Leonardo Da Vinci, he didn't worry about whether this was too difficult or too scientific or too engineering. He just used his creativity to think and believe that something that he couldn't see was actually out there. Just like Harden mentioned earlier, you have to use that curiosity so that you can dive into that rabbit hole and get super creative. If I wouldn't have dug into my creativity, I wouldn't be able to stand on stages today and take a whole lot of bold risk to sing for over hundreds and hundreds of people. Speaking of risk, I want to introduce one of my great friends, Evan, and he's going to talk to us about taking risk and even failure. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Evan Cooper. Thank you, Chanette. So as Chanette mentioned, I want to talk to you guys about something different. We've already spoken about curiosity, what drives people to discover. We've already talked about creativity, what allows people to create ideas and processes that haven't existed before. But I want to talk to you about risk and failure. But before I talk to you about it, I want to show you a little bit about it too. So I'm going to grab something real quick. We're going to show a little example of risk. So I don't know if anyone here has ever heard of the experiment fire bubbles, but there's an experiment where you can hold fire safely in your hands. Now, it might seem too good to be true, but through science and through proper safety practices, there is a way to hold fire safely in your hands. It's pretty cool, right? So that is a very good example of risk. And, I wasn't actually in any kind of danger there, but the first time I ever did it, or the first time I ever saw a teacher do that experiment, it was a little bit scary. And I was worried that I was going to burn my hand if I ever did it. But because of the proper safety practices, like dipping your hand in water first to be a heat sink, it's perfectly safe. So wanted to show you that little small example of risk. So through science, there is and always will be a little bit of a risk. And there's also the risk of failure. Risk and failure go hand in hand in this field. And sometimes the risk of failure can even be more terrifying than anything. And it causes people to not even try to see what they might be capable of. And I say that's ridiculous. The absolute game changers in science have always been some of the biggest risk takers. And some of them have made some of the most notable failures. A really great example of this is Neil Armstrong. Neil Armstrong was a pioneer in science. He took the first steps on the moon. And where would we be today if we hadn't gone to the moon? Who knows? It was a humongous landmark for America and for humanity. Now, Neil Armstrong didn't have a perfect career. When he was in the Air Force, he was testing new aircraft and actually had several large crashes. But did he let that stop him? No. As we all know, he continued his career and ended up taking the first steps on the moon. He became one of the most famous people in science, even though he had some really huge failures. He didn't stop. He persevered, he learned from those failures, and he kept going. Exploring science and engineering means you must accept that there will always be a risk of failure, and that's okay. Failure is one of the best drivers of innovation because in science, we learn not only from our successes, but we learn what doesn't work from our failures, and it's an incredibly part of the scientific process. I have failed many times in my life. It taught me more than my successes ever did, I think. Through the process of getting my degree in zoology, I had to take a lot of different science classes, physics, biology, organic chemistry, horticulture, all these different things that weren't really my main focus of study. And I got to tell you, I failed organic chemistry twice, 2 times. I was incredibly embarrassed after that. And it made me think that I might not actually be cut out for science. But I didn't give up. I applied what I learned from both of those hard failures, and it helped inform me of how I need to study, what I need to change in order to be successful in organic chemistry. And now, because I stuck with it and I didn't give up, I was able to experience what it's like to live in Tanzania and study elephants in the wild. I've been able to work with some of the most renowned marine scientists in the world, and I've been able to help hand rear endangered birds. And all of those things were possible because I didn't let a failure stop me. It actually was a really important part of my career. And I was able to experience all the wonderful joys that a career in science can offer, just as many of you might experience later in life. Risk is something that has always been at the edge of discovery. Explorers looking at the ocean's horizon hundreds of years ago literally thought they might fall off the edge of the earth if they set sail. But what did they do? They set sail anyway. When talking about risk takers in North Carolina, it would feel wrong to not talk about two of my favorites, the Wright brothers. Does anyone know what the license plates in North Carolina say on the back of them? First in flight. And there's a reason that North Carolina as a state gets that very special distinction. It's because the Wright brothers innovated and were willing to take huge risks in order to develop flight for humans. Not only did they take many risks, but they also had many failures along the way too. They didn't wake up one day and suddenly make an aircraft capable of carrying a human. Not at all. They had many, many failures. Does anybody know how many failed flying machines the Wright brothers made? Just see if I can see it in the chat. Any guesses? 110, 76. Okay, kind of close. All right, that's a lot of failures. They had many, but it was 7. But think about what goes into that. They have to design, fabricate, test, and then rebuild after each one of those failures. They had 7 different flying machines that they thought were really going to work. They flew them and they crashed and failed. So not only was there risk, but there was a lot of failure. But can you imagine what would have happened if they had given up after 1, 2, 3, or even 7 of those failures? Humans might not have ever developed real flight. And think about all of the changes and innovations that have happened because of air travel. It's changed the way that we do commerce, we travel, the way that rescue missions can happen, and the list goes on. Flight has really changed the world for the better. The largest leaps in human history and human discovery have come with a lot of risk and a lot of failure. Each generation faces challenges that call upon scientists to create a solution, whether it be drought, population growth, clean energy, or even a global pandemic. I challenge you to answer those questions of today and tomorrow by staying curious, using your creativity, and embracing risk and failure. Science is a really noble pursuit, and I just cannot wait to see what each and every one of you are capable of. Thank you. I think I'll go ahead and invite my other speakers up, and we can get to the Q&A. I'll also turn our volume up so we can hear you guys.
Wonderful. Great. Well, you all get put into place. I will invite everyone who is in the session right now to drop any questions you have for this team at Marbles. Anything they talked about or anything else. If you're a little curious about Marbles and have never been there, we'd love to answer some questions on that too. And I will get us started as our researchers start thinking. So just listening to you all and reading your bios, I feel like you all had some very different pathways to Marbles. And so sometimes when we think about STEM or maybe a degree in zoology, we kind of have this imagined field and pathway in our head. Can all 3 of you or any one of you who wants to share a little bit about what you maybe thought you wanted to do and how you got to where you are?
Yeah, I can take that one. So I'll keep my mask on for this. So yeah, I got my undergraduate degree in zoology, and I thought I was going to be in the wilderness 9 months out of the year studying wolves and things like that. And while I loved wildlife research and field research, I also realized that, it just wasn't quite clicking for me. Then my career trajectory changed a little bit, and I was like, you know what, I want to work in zoos and aquariums because I think that accredited zoos and aquariums have a really great potential for conservation education. And I worked there and I loved it. I trained animals, I raised them from being babies, and it was incredibly rewarding. But then again, through that work, I also realized that actually one of the most rewarding parts of that job was communicating with the public that I got to interact with at those places and teaching them through educational programs. So then one thing led to another, and Marbles had an opportunity for a science educator position, and it was kind of the perfect fit because learning through play is really all of what I'm about. And I got to take that passion that I have for animals and wildlife and kind of use that and leverage it to talk to the community here in Raleigh in a way that is really impactful. And, I didn't expect that I'd work at a kids museum, but I wouldn't change anything from how that worked.
So I started out as a middle school teacher. I was a middle school language arts and social studies teacher for many years, and then went out on my own as a literacy consultant doing professional development for teachers and doing some curriculum development. Moved here to North Carolina from California, and brought my kids to play at Marbles quite often, and then Marbles ended up becoming one of my clients. So I did some program development for them, and then eventually loved Marbles so much that I came on board as an exhibit and programs developer. Ended up starting to develop a lot of science programming, even though I'm not a science person, although I think we really all are science people. Just found myself continually curious about all of these different topics and really inspired to make those STEM topics both super engaging for kids and find ways to make them really fun so that kids would find themselves curious about those topics as well. And also to make some kind of obscure or cutting edge STEM topics really accessible for kids of all ages. I really am passionate about helping kids see themselves, all kids see themselves as scientists now and not just in the future. And I also really love when parents bring their kids to Marbles because they want their kids to experience some of our STEM programs and events, but then the parents find themselves just as curious and engaged as their kids are.
Like she said, I am definitely one of those parents. I was bringing my children to Marbles Kids Museum when they were tiny, like 2 and 7. Actually, I had one in the belly when I was bringing my oldest to Marbles Kids Museum. I was counting on those STEM programs actually as a mother. I was a homeschool parent at the time. And so homeschooling, I loved it. I was great at it. Science, exactly, specifically that subject, was not one of my stronger areas. And so I relied on Marbles Kids Museum heavily to provide that STEM programming throughout the week and on the weekends for my children to engage in. Even after my youngest was born, I was still bringing him, involving him in programs. And my background is in music education, eventually in early childhood education. But I merged the two when I came on board here with Marbles Kids Museum, because of course I love to play. I love early childhood learning. I love to see the little ones engaging in learning. However, being that I have this music background, I'm always trying to figure out a way to implement storytelling, sound, music into our programs, whether it's a science-based program or whether it's actually more of a literacy-based program, even if it's early math learning programs. Being able to implement music and storytelling is my favorite thing, and it brought me, Marbles is a place where I can throw all of my gifts in one big pot and play around with everything that I am, from musician to budding, almost pretend scientist.
Real.
Oh, I love that. So Chanette, I have a question specifically for you. As you talked about creativity, it seemed to really resonate with some of our young researchers, and thinking about a lot of them talked about how it's something that you really has to be personal and unique to you. I would love to just hear a little bit about, was it, as a younger woman, was it easy to kind of hold true to that creative self?
You know what? It was easy because when you feel that creativity inside of you, it's like an engine. Whether you want to turn it off or not, whether you want to turn it off, yeah, or not, you can't. It's just a part of you. It slips out whether you meant for it to or not. So the part that gets difficult is when it's clashing with things that you shouldn't be doing, whether you're a boy or a girl. Drawing on his paper, that was my son's biggest problem, but he's a great artist today. But when he was a little kid, he scribbled on every assignment he turned in, and he was always getting in trouble for that. But he never stopped. So like, no matter how many times he got in trouble for scribbling on his papers that he turned in, his math homework, whatever it was, he didn't stop. He couldn't stop scribbling and doodling. And now, I mean, he's in school for art history. And so it's the same with me with my music, tapping on desk, fiddling with sound while I was in the middle of a class. I couldn't shut that off, no matter how hard I tried. So I just learned that no matter what, this creativity is here, and I'm going to start honing it because it's not going anywhere. And that's what I encourage every child to do. They're gonna find their own version of what creativity is. We see amazing designers come in Marbles Kids Museum all the time. They come to studio styles where they design dresses and outfits and clothing that I could have never thought up myself. But you know, we encourage those parents that are there with them, get some needle out at home and see what they come up with, because they'll surprise you with what's inside of them. Kids don't even know what's inside of them when they're that young. They just know there's this engine revving and it's creativity, and they're ready to play with all kinds of styles and forms of creativity. So we want to give them that opportunity as much as possible.
Great, thank you. And I love that metaphor of the engine revving inside of you. It's that nice driver. Isaiah wanted to follow up with, when did you discover your own musical talent?
Probably maybe around 8 or 9, but it was already there. I just didn't know it was a musical talent. It wasn't until other people start saying, hey, you know, you're pretty talented. And then I was like, what? What's that mean? So people start telling you before you know it's there sometimes.
Y'all should hear her sing.
Well, we're ready. She's like, don't do that to me. So a question kind of, I guess, for all of you, as you talk to us today about curiosity and creativity and failure, I know that those 3 words are like, they're easy to say, but they can be really hard to live through. So as you think about our young researchers moving through the world and hitting, you know, some high points and some low points, do you have any advice for them about how to keep those things at the center and keep that passion and that motor running?
I think, you know, I think about the 4 C's: creativity, collaboration, critical thinking, and communication. And I would add to that some other qualities like persistence and not seeing failure as an ending, but seeing failure as an opportunity, and always kind of putting yourself out there to try again, and also not being afraid to ask for help and rely on others to help you overcome that failure by giving you new information or support or ideas. Some of the greatest inventions and discoveries that have ever been made came after, like Evan was saying, with the Wright Brothers, came after a lot of failure. And just, we can all be so grateful that that those inventors and those people who made those breakthrough discoveries were persistent and didn't give up. Do you have anything else to add?
I mean, just as someone who has, you know, experienced highs and lows in like especially a science education background and in zoology, you know, not thinking I was gonna, glasses are fogging up, not thinking I was going to, you know, really cut it. I would say nothing is set in stone. And so, you know, just because you think what you want to do is one thing, that doesn't mean it has to be that thing. It very well may be, and that's wonderful, but it can also change and adapt. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like lots of people like Leonardo Da Vinci, he had many different interests and went from what drove him and made him curious. And that path was very windy. So I would just urge you to, you know, listen to yourself and be willing to follow what really drives you rather than feeling like you have to stay on one path.
I think it's also really easy for us to do the things that we know that we're good at, but it's really important to do the things that are hard, because that is where growth comes from. I think about my 2 daughters and when they were young, taking piano lessons. And I think that was one of the best opportunities for them, because every week you get new songs and they're hard and you don't sound very good, but you practice, and by the end of the week that you've mastered them, and that's a great experience. And then the next week you get new songs and they're hard and you don't sound good, but you practice and you master them. And I think that is how we all maximize our own potential, is by pushing ourselves finding those edges of our capability and doing those hard things.
Chanette, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, Evan, he spoke on failure, and you can't be a singer-songwriter without being really okay with failure. But usually singers and songwriters are not okay with failure. We are performers, so when we get up to do it, we want it to be, I hit the nail on the head and I did a great job. But I was 13 when I entered my first real big talent show. And I will never forget that they could only choose one winner, and that winner was not me. But when they came out on the stage, the guy hosting the show said, you know, they put their hand over the person for the crowd to cheer. And they were cheering just as loud for me as the winner. And he said, I'm going to tell you what, the other person won. He said, but that little girl, she's going to do it real big one day, because if y'all would have got her music right, they started my music too late. He said, if y'all would have got her music right, she would have nailed that song. And then instead of leaving defeated, because my mother was very mad that I didn't win, I was walking out going, so I had a chance? I had a chance, you know? And that meant I failed, but now I know what's next. And that's how you got to look at it. You have to be okay with failure so that you can see what the next move is going to be. And it all works together. Failing is winning, in my opinion. You know what's next when you fail.
That's amazing. And I think, Shubi, did that answer your question? She asked for an example. Yes, wonderful. Okay. She wanted an example of failing on stage. So yeah, just thank you so much to this amazing team, Evan, Hardened, Chanette. This has been a great session, and I love how interdisciplinary you reminded us that all of this work is, and flexible our pathway needs to be, and great advice on the perseverance and being willing to change and learn from those struggles that you face in life. With that, I am going to just make sure that everybody remembers to drop into Marbles and learn with that team. Lauren Sanders in our Spark Talks actually talked about working with you all and what an amazing place it is. And so if anybody wants to reach out to Marbles and needs help getting into contact, just go ahead and reach out to me, and I will make sure that I connect you with the right person at the museum. So thank you so much for joining us, the Marbles team. We are thrilled to have you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, this is
we
wonderful.
were overjoyed with the opportunity, and congratulations again to all of you who are in the North Carolina Science and Engineering Fair. That's amazing.
Wonderful. All right. And so with that, we do have one little break coming up, and then we will have our star researchers ready to present to us. And so what you will do is we will close off this session, and then we will jump back into the 2 minutes with a mic starting at 12:15. The link for that can be found in Symposium again. And so we look forward to seeing you in just about 10 minutes. Thank you for joining us.